Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the last fireside chat session of the SB10X Open House in the Metaverse. And it's certainly not last but not least because I'm very excited to have my guest join me, Gabby Dizon. Gabby is the co-founder of play-to-earn gaming guild Yield Guild Games, or YGG, which is an organization that provides players all over the world an opportunity to access the NFT game assets needed to earn crypto-based rewards in return for their time and skill they put into playing the game. Gabby is also a founding board member of the Blockchain Game Alliance and advises NFT and Web3 gaming projects. Gabby's mission is to onboard millions of players to access the opportunities in the digital world. I think that number is low, actually, from last I heard. And a topic that's near and dear to my heart, he believes that the future of work is in the open metaverse. Thank you so much for joining us, Gabby. Really appreciate it. I'm very excited to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Maybe we can start it off by opening the floor to see if you wanted to add anything else to that introduction and maybe hear a little bit more of your story about how you went from sort of 18 years in the gaming industry and finding your way into crypto and play-to-earn gaming.
Okay, so I'll make the history lesson pretty brief. So I graduated in 2000, started as a web programmer, joined the team that made the first ever game in the Philippines. So this was in 2003, and then worked in a variety of gaming companies. And in 2014, started my own game studio, Altitude Games, in Manila. So Altitude Games, we're making casual games for iOS and Android devices. And in 2017, we discovered crypto via Ethereum. We heard about the concept of smart contracts and wanted to see how smart contracts could one day disrupt the gaming industry. So we started diving into it. And it was during this experimentation when CryptoKitties came out in late 2017 and popularized the non-fungible token, or the NFT. And this is really the light bulb moment where I thought that this is it. NFTs are going to change the game industry. So I really got into it then. Didn't realize that the next 2 years would be pretty difficult for the crypto industry as a whole. And a lot of these innovations actually take a lot longer than you think. So we persevered, stayed in the NFT space. We've co-founded the Blockchain Game Alliance with Seb, among other people. And it's really trying to push the use cases of what NFTs could uniquely enable during the game industry. And I started playing Axie Infinity in 2018. So I was probably there were less than 500 people in the community. And I was playing all the way up to 2020 when the pandemic hit. And when the pandemic hit, a lot of people here in my home country, the Philippines, were left jobless. They were basically at home looking for ways to earn money. And that's when they found Axie Infinity. People found Axie, and these weren't really technologically savvy people. These were very ordinary people who were looking for ways to make money online from the rural areas of the Philippines. And they found Axie, started playing the game, earned the SLP token, converted that into Philippine pesos, and discovered that their economic opportunities from crypto-based games like Axie Infinity were better than the jobs that were available to them that time. And yeah, that's how Axie started really growing in the Philippines, and that's where we decided to start YGG.
Excellent. That's a perfect segue for my next question. If you can give us just a very high-level introduction to what YGG is and the vision and goal. And I know it's probably changed over time, so we can talk about how that sort of started and what it's sort of become.
Okay, so we call YGG a play-to-earn gaming guild. So that means that we collect the NFT assets in different blockchain-based games where players can earn token or NFT-based rewards. And then we lend out these assets to our community player base. So they play these games and earn yield. And by doing so, get access to the economic opportunities in the crypto space, or the metaverse, open metaverse, as we like to call it. What's important about this is that most of the people in our community enter crypto without having any money to start with, but they have time and skill that they have in gaming. So this is their entryway into crypto. Most people who come into crypto up to this point basically have to buy an asset like Bitcoin or Ethereum to get started. But with Play to Earn, you use your time and skill and effort to earn digital assets, which can then give you the opportunity to kind of move up and own assets in your financial life. And yeah, so that's what we do. We onboard people to these games, into what's known as the scholarship or lending programs. We teach people how to use wallets, how to play these games, how to secure their assets, and we do that via these communities of play to earn games that are playing these different games.
That's one thing that I love about what you've done with YGG. This idea of looking at that very truly first problem of onboarding people, and that's really having the resources to get involved, and just eliminating that with a financial model that works, and it sort of helps everybody. Now, I've heard people call YGG the labor union of the metaverse, and so two parts of that. I mean, I love that phrase because it feels so socially important, but also we're living in the future in some way.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think the theme of this open house is first question is, what does the metaverse mean to you, and perhaps maybe what does the open metaverse mean to you, and how does YGG fit into that?
Okay, there's probably a lot of definitions of the metaverse. For me, it's a place online where I am interacting with things that I can own with other people. The before crypto, or now the movement known as Web3, we are in the internet a lot. We create content, but we never really owned what we created. For example, when you uploaded content to social media, that's really no longer yours. That's owned by the platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, whatever. In Web3, you have the opportunity to own the assets that you're creating, be they NFTs such as Axes, or maybe having ownership in DAOs, or creating intellectual property that may be encapsulated in something like an NFT, for example. So this is the opportunity to own the assets. And for me, the metaverse is interacting with the different kind of programs, protocols, websites that allow you to own things online. And the distinction between a closed and metaverse, open metaverse, is very important, because I guess what we call Web2 now, like the large platforms, the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, have monopolized so much of the value because they have been very successful companies that have created unique value and are able to charge a premium for them. Whereas we see Web3 as companies that have their data stored publicly on the blockchain, instead of hiding them behind their own proprietary database and charging high fees for it. And we have different protocols that can remix and kind of work with each other. So for example, YGG does not need to expressly ask for Axie Infinity's permission to buy NFTs in the marketplace and then lend them out to players. It's something that is uniquely kind of enabled by putting the assets on a blockchain. And that's what we mean by the open metaverse, having data and protocol that is out there on the internet that people can remix and reuse without having to ask permission, is, I think, one of the hallmarks of an open metaverse.
I love that definition, because I think it really gets to the heart of what's unique about what we're trying to build here, or what's sort of foundationally important, especially around the sort of movement into Web3, but also, at a more fundamental level of a lot of people always ask, why even blockchain? It's like, can't we use, in the West, it would be Venmo or bank transfers. But I think it's this core idea of having a true ownership or true access. Have you heard of a term? I sort of come from the DeFi space, and we like to use the term money Legos. Have you heard of a term that's sort of a Lego term that's encapsulated with what you're talking about in the metaverse?
I think the concept of money Lego still fits very well within NFTs. We talk about things like interoperability and portability a lot. The idea that when you make a game, it's usually, you think of making a game world, and then you're thinking of items, assets, a world that works within that game world. And in the open metaverse, it's a complete opposite. I start with the assets. So for example, I may come up with an NFT drop, something like a CloneX, which are 20,000 NFTs that people can own, and they look like profile pictures, but you're actually building different metaverse experiences around them. So the way to think about value is inverted. It's not that you create a world and then you create the assets that interact with the world. You start with the assets that you can either sell or give or have your user base own them. And then you build different kinds of experiences that can use those assets. So for example, if I mint 10,000 NFTs and then sell them to people, it's not just like I'm making one game around them. I can make a casual game that makes 3 months to make. I can make another airdrop that takes 6 months to make. I can be building a whole MMO game that takes 5 years to make. And I think that's really what the interoperability means in this case.
That's such a great way to put it. I've had an evolution of my own understanding of NFTs myself, where I sort of now see it as a fundamental building block to how we're going to build this sort of community-owned world in and beyond the metaverse. Actually, one of my favorite projects from last year was Loot, which was such a sort of an encapsulation of that very basic idea of building these building blocks. And so, so taking that definition of the metaverse, what's your take on YGG being the labor union of the metaverse?
Okay, so we say that because we are a congregation of player communities, and as a congregation of player communities, we are able to aggregate and basically make requests for our user base on what they want and need. This takes form of different ways. One is that we work with a lot of games and buy their assets early so that we can offer them to our players. A lot of the times we buy into these assets even before the game is released, which means that we have some insight and can provide advice on how the guild mechanics can work in a way that is better served by the players. It also means that we can own governance tokens in the games and actually be a representative of our players for governance. So because we're aggregating players that are playing different games, we also are giving them a voice. Each individual player probably doesn't have a chance making suggestions in how a game can benefit the player base more, but if we aggregate that into the guild, then that voice can be heard louder.
So that's great. I mean, you were talking about collective action and sort of like worker-owned businesses, or
Yeah.
at least balance of power.
Yeah,
I mean, I love it. I love all of it. Well, you talked about a little bit at the beginning of just the explosion of Axie Infinity last year, and one thing that resonated with me and probably with you, both being based in Southeast Asia, is that it started in the Philippines. It really exploded in the Philippines, and the fact that it's regional, that sort of pushed this model of the future forward, I was very proud of that. Right? It's sort of this. We're sort of at the front edge of that. Why do you think that happened, both maybe in the Philippines or this region? What do you think were the factors that contributed to that being where it sort of like really caught on?
okay, so there's a confluence of factors that have been there for a long time. One is that Filipinos are one of the most socially active populations, like active on social media. Actually, Thais, I think, are like Philippines and Thai are like number one and number two in like social media.
Close.
Yeah. So ever since like Friendster 20 years ago to Facebook, iMeme, Tumblr, like every social network in between, it's always had a very high population of Filipinos, and the same goes for social games. Social games have always had a high population of people from the Philippines, but these voices have never really been heard because they were not monetizable. So Philippines is usually used as one of those like beta testing, soft launch countries because you can get a lot of players, but you don't get a lot of monetization. The interesting thing about the metaverse is that these players are now getting paid to do actions in a game or virtual world that doesn't care what country they're from. So now each person has a voice, and you're not just looking at people from the Philippines or Thailand as like an abstract unit like DAUs. You're now looking at them with people who are actually building their wealth and their financial assets by engaging in these games via like communities like YGG. So it's really an inversion of the model where you're recognizing every person who was bringing something unique to the network.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of what we're talking about. I mean, ever since the early days of Bitcoin, it's like these inversions of how we go, and I think that's probably like a characteristic as we see decentralization happen, right? You see these basically flips of power that are going on. So it feels like a theme. Are you, from your perspective in YGG, and I know you guys are scaling right now globally, are there other play to earn ecosystems that are really interesting or sort of like very vibrant right now?
Yeah, so we've actually bought or invested in assets in over 40 games in virtual worlds. The largest is still by far Axie Infinity. We actually have a bunch of estate land in the sandbox. Our players have created sub-DAOs to manage our games in games such as League of Kingdoms and Splinterlands. And now there are a couple of games that are new, such as Cyball and Fancy Birds, that our players are also getting into.
And those are those also in Southeast Asia? Or are you seeing sort of burgeoning other like, geographies that are happening?
So the major geos for us are across Southeast Asia. So we recently partnered to put up YGG Southeast Asia, which is covering Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and now we have YGG India or IndyGG. Latin America is huge. Brazil, Africa is huge. So a lot of the people who are playing these games are coming from emerging markets who are, I see them as like the colonizers of the metaverse, the settlers of the metaverse. People are coming and there's this new fresh land that people like Seb have created. And now people have to come in and either play things, do things, or create new things in them. And yeah, we're leading the charge and helping populate it with people from emerging markets throughout the world.
What's a geo or perhaps a combination of geo game that's been surprising to you?
Surprising, I would say that like Brazil has really like stood out in terms of like not only people playing the game, they actually have a really good esports market. So there's a lot of like competitive players coming out of Brazil. A lot of like streamers have also come out there in full support. So there's a lot of activity going on there in Play to Earn.
Very cool. This is really a question of my own. Just sort of being able to have an opportunity to talk to you as both a game expert and sort of coming to being also a play to earn expert. You know, I've been a casual gamer all my life, all the way from Commodore 64 all the way up to Fortnite and now play to earn.
I can guess your age from the computers you were playing.
Of course, exactly. That's what happened when I joined my last job too. I told someone I played Neuromancer, and they were like, "Okay, so this is your demo right now." So we watched this sort of transition, and I think what was interesting over the past maybe generation is you get mobile, and you were involved in that, and you get free to play games. But now we're seeing this sort of like movement into pay to play, right? Some loot boxes, and then there was like Fortnite was a huge thing. How did we get from sort of like single box experience to these additional economic models, and now they seem like they're pulling in two different directions, right? You have these like sort of pay to play games in terms of like microtransactions, and then you have these play to earn games.
Yep.
From your perspective as such a veteran, like how do you see that how do you make sense of that evolution?
Yeah, so in the 90s, software was mainly kind of paying for a boxed experience, and the dominant business model was actually shareware. So you would download a portion of the game, and if you like it, you mailed some cash over to an address, and then you would be able to receive the rest of the game. And then came the retail era, early 2000s, where I think PC and console were dominant. And then there were two things that were interesting that happened. One is the rise of free-to-play from actually from Asia, primarily Korea, that really pioneered the free-to-play business model on like PC MMOs like MapleStory. And the other was the emergence of mobile games, which I would say is really kind of started more as an Asian phenomenon, but really accelerated by iPhone and after that Android. And when you combine those two in the 2010s, the mobile free-to-play business grew so large because now there are several billion people with these large devices in their hands that could play complex games, and you can do in-app purchase and watch ads. So that really grew the game industry, where I think there's like around $50 billion in in-app purchases made in the last year alone. And now you're moving to play to earn, where instead of just spending money inside these games, you're spending your money, time, effort, and actually able to own a piece of the in-game economy. Yeah, which is really revolutionary. I mean, gold farming has existed before, but it's always been kind of gray market, not really like allowed by the developers. But gold farming had happened in games such as World of Warcraft because you could assign a monetary value to the assets that were in the game. But this was not really kind of allowed, or it was frowned upon by the developers. And now you're looking at these play to earn economies, and you're seeing that the developers are designing these games from the ground up to be play to earn, for the players to own the economy and the developers to be there as kind of orchestrators of the economy rather than having all of the value going to them. You can have players now own, the castles in the role-playing game. They can have the knights. You can own land, have the peasants farm the resources. And yeah, now you're going to have like very complex economies where you're storing the value on public blockchains. So you can have things like currencies or tokens or NFTs. And it just makes for a very rich experience because now people are not just having fun, they can also own the value that they create in these complex virtual worlds.
That's yeah. It's still a huge thing for me. I guess it's still a huge thing for probably the industry to wrap its head around. I think one moment for me a few years ago when I was playing Fortnite, and Fortnite obviously had crazy amounts of revenue and in-app purchases. It was such a fun game, and I was playing it all the time, and I never bought anything. But then I realized that I'm the product, right? Like I'm the guy who's running around, who's like getting shot at, right? For the people who are really the serious players. And looking back at that from the perspective of play to earn, it's like, shouldn't I be part of that? Shouldn't I get some benefit of bringing some of that richness into that game economy? But that takes me to the second thing that's hard to wrap my head around is that was very clear for me who was sort of like the source of like value and sort of revenue coming into that economy. Whereas like, I would potentially in a play to earn model be sort of like where that goes, I would get paid out. In terms of designing some of these play to earn games for sustainability, how do you see sort of separating or balancing out some of these economic factors of getting sort of like value into the system and then paying value out of the system?
Yeah, so when you're designing a play to earn economy, you would want to design for different cohorts of people who would want to put money in the game for different reasons. Some of them would want to pay for cosmetics, for example. Some of them may want to pay for the privilege of flexing with their group. Some of them are paying for assets that can maybe give them token or NFT rewards. And some of them might be kind of performing menial jobs that are getting them the equivalent of yield. So I think in any kind of economy, you have to put more in than what you're taking out of it. And this is kind of a lesson in tokenomics that people are still learning up to now. Like, how can you design a game so that you're enabling people to earn yield, which, by the way, is a fantastic source of user acquisition, because what the SLP model in Axie Infinity has shown, SLP is a token that people produce when winning games. And the reason it has value is that people are willing to buy it. Why are they buying it? Because it has a corresponding use in game. In this case, they're being burned to have the right to create or breed more Axies. So now you can have this complex economy where people are basically performing different sorts of jobs within that economy. I'm farming SLP, I'm selling it to a breeder is breeding new Axies, selling it to a scholarship provider or a person who wants to play a game, and then you can craft more things out of resources. You can mine out of the game world. So the economy planning is getting actually extremely complex, and you have to have the kind of the economy design to make sure that you're bringing more money in than you're paying out in yield.
Yeah, there are a bunch of keywords that jump out at me from what you just said, and we're running out of time, so I want to get into the thing that actually is the thing that's dear for me. And you mentioned, you have a complex economy of people doing tasks for the game, but that sort of opens up this idea of like, how could it be bigger? right? And I think that leads to what's next for YGG. And I think I've heard a little bit of what you've said about it, but I would love to hear you expand more on what scale looks like, and how does it expand into basically other future of work models.
Yeah, so future work is something we think about a lot. People look at the kind of core scholarship model and they think that's what guilds are. I think that's just barely scratches the surface of what guilds are. If you look at what we're doing at YGG, we're onboarding people into these DAOs, giving people crypto wallets, and then giving them different kinds of work to do in the metaverse so that you can not only earn an income, but more importantly, you can earn ownership in whatever it is you're contributing to. So for example, in YGG, you can basically do some work that's useful for the guild and earn YGG tokens, which is like being part owner of the guild itself rather than just merely being kind of paid for showing up or doing a task. And this is a really important concept. We want people to have ownership because ownership kind of implies some kind of upside if that network goes well. And this is something that we want to extend to anyone in all corners of the world. We don't want it confined to Silicon Valley or Singapore or just in Manila, for example, in the city centers. We want anyone in the world to come in. I have maybe a mobile device, internet access, a crypto wallet, and I can find a creative job in the metaverse that pays me ownership in the protocols I'm contributing to. So this is something that we're really working towards long term. And it's my goal for the next 10 to 20 years to make sure that everyone on earth has this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Gabby, for that goal. I mean, it's incredibly inspiring. I mean, I've heard you talk about things like the expansion of that model from learn to earn and move to earn and maybe party to earn and things like that. And that for me is such an exciting thing. We're at 1 minute left, and so I wanted to open the floor to you if there's anything you wanted to sort of cover or anything you wanted to talk about to close out this session.
The concept of play to earn and contributing in DAOs is still very new. And if you're wondering how you get started, what I say to people is just go in, join a community, play a game, get some NFTs. If you can't afford them, join a scholarship. Let's find a way to contribute. And that's the best way to understand what the Web3 movement is like. And the great thing about that, it's really open to anyone in the world for you to contribute. And you don't even have to put in your real name. A lot of people I work with are pseudonymous. My co-founder is anonymous. And yeah, there's a place for everyone in Web3.
That's awesome. What a great vision. Thank you so much for joining us. I really could keep going, but we are out of time. We really appreciate it, Gabby.
Thank you.